And then I'll answer it in English after I answer it in Spanish. So any other languages, won't be able to do it. But those two, and then, so I look. When I took over Secretary of State, I'll refer you back to the hearings we had in the Senate in January about the role I hope to play. And I believe very strongly this president was elected. One of the reasons why he was elected, very specific things, but one of the reasons why President Trump was elected is sort of an understanding among the American people that our foreign policy was in need of a complete recalibration. A recalibration because the world had dramatically changed. Many of the institutions, policies, assumptions that our foreign policy was operating under were built upon a world that no longer existed. And it required us to re-examine that. One of the assumptions that I think we had lost during this period of time, and I don't mean to make this an academic lecture, but I wanted to give you some insight into the broader thinking, as I highlighted at that hearing less than a year, almost a year ago now, is one of the assumptions was the loss of the notion of the national interest in our foreign policy. At the core, foreign policy needs to be the national interest of the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't issues and things we care about in the world, but at its core, the core principle of the national interest, the core principle behind our foreign policy needs to be our national interest. So you have to, first of all, define what is the national interest, and then you have to apply it. We defined it as we are in favor of foreign policies that make America safer or stronger or more prosperous, hopefully all three, but at least one of those three. And then it requires you to prioritize. Even the richest, most powerful and influential country on earth has limited resources, has limited time. And it has to be able to dedicate those resources and time through a process of prioritization. That includes geographic prioritization. It also includes issue prioritization. And that's what we intend to do here. Then you have to have the mechanisms of foreign policy to deliver on it. In essence, you have to have a Department of State and a National Security Council and all the elements of U.S. foreign policy influence and power to deliver, to identify and then deliver on those priorities. And that's what we've attempted to do here, and I think we're well on our way to doing it. There's more work to be done. There's things we will improve upon. But generally speaking, it was the genesis behind the reorganization of the department, oftentimes applying reforms that secretaries of states of both parties, appointed by presidents of both parties, have long sought to do. And we're very proud of that going into effect and continuing to work forward. I think we generally avoided, massive disruptions to our operation, although any transition involves some disruption. But we're very happy with the way we empowered our regional bureaus, meaning our embassies and the folks at the desks here behind the regions have become more empowered and having influence over every element of our foreign policy, particularly how it's applied tactically. At the same time, one of the things we looked at is foreign aid. Foreign aid is not a separate activity of the United States government. It is an element and a tool of our foreign policy, and it should be used for the purpose of furthering the national interest. That doesn't mean we don't care about human rights. That doesn't mean we don't care about starvation. That doesn't mean we don't care about hunger. That doesn't mean we don't care about humanitarian need. What it does mean, however, is that even foreign aid, which is not charity, it is an act of the U.S. taxpayer. Now, American charities are free to give their money to whoever they want, as long as it's not a sanctioned entity. But the United States and the taxpayer money should be spent in furtherance of our foreign policy, should be spent in places and on things that further our foreign policy. And even that is not unlimited. We have a limited amount of money that we can dedicate to foreign aid and humanitarian assistance. And that has to be applied in a way that furthers our national interests. And that's what we have sought to do as well. And in that endeavor as well, we have empowered the regional bureaus and our embassies to play a dramatic role. In fact, they are not just the implementers of this. They, in many cases, are the ones that are suggesting and are leading the response. And so bringing the tools of foreign aid underneath the umbrella of our broader foreign policy has been an important and dramatic reform. Even in the midst of all that, we remain engaged around the world, including in conflicts that perhaps are not central to everyday life in America, but the president has made it a priority to be a peacemaker. And so you've seen us engaged, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, or India and Pakistan, or Thailand and Cambodia, which is an ongoing challenge, or the tragedy we see now in Sudan, or the potential for further strife in South Sudan and that falling apart. I mean, no matter Armenia and Azerbaijan, we are always looking for opportunities, if possible, to play the role of a mediator that brings about the avoidance of war or the ending of conflicts. And obviously, in many of these cases, you can get people to the table and agree, and then there's the implementation process. And so we've made progress in many of these, particularly in getting them to agree to certain conditions. Obviously, it's ongoing work to make sure that those are implemented and applied. And some of these, conflicts have deep roots that go back many, many years. But we are prepared to be engaged and helpful in ways that perhaps other nations can't. We've been viewed as indispensable in that regard, and it's a role the president takes great pride in the promotion of peace around the world, and something he deserves a lot of credit for. He is personally engaged in all of this. Obviously, the big one was the situation with Gaza, which again is ongoing. There is now a ceasefire. There's that war is no longer going on at the scale and scope and all the things that were going on before. But obviously there's more work to remain. We are still through the process of trying to implement phase 1 and lead to phase 2 and phase 3. That is a long-term project, some of which will extend beyond the 4 years of this administration, but I thought it was a very important achievement as well. So we have a lot to be proud about. I know you probably have some specific questions, and we can get to those, but I wanted to let that, lay that out as the preface and predicate for everything we're going to do today. So I'm going to start. How do I start? I'm going to start from the back row forward, and then I'll just juggle in between. I'll be here pretty long, so we'll get to everybody. Don't get desperate. Don't get wild. All right, I'll start with this gentleman with the white hair in the back. Yes, sir.
Ask you about Gaza. U.S. wants Pakistan troops to be in Gaza. Has U.S. got a consent from Pakistan that they will be sending their troops in Gaza for peace building and peacemaking?
Yeah. Well, look, in fairness to all the countries we've talked to about being and having a presence on the ground, I think they want to know specifically, what the mandate, what the specific mandate it was, the funding mechanism looks like. So we're very grateful to Pakistan for their offer to be a part of it, or at least their offer to consider being a part of it. I think we owe them a few more answers before we can ask anybody to firmly commit. But I feel very confident that we have a number of nation states acceptable to all sides in this who are willing to step forward and be a part of that stabilization force. And certainly, Pakistan is key if they agree to do so. But I think we owe them a few more answers before we get there. We're trying to make a lot of progress here with I think the next step here is announcing the Board of Peace, announcing the Palestinian Technocratic Group that will help provide daily governance. And then once that's in place, I think that will allow us to firm up the stabilization force, including how it's going to be paid for, what their rules of engagement are, what their role will be in demilitarization and so forth.
Thank you.
Next to you in the back.
Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for doing this. I want to start with Russia-Ukraine. You mentioned that...
Easy stuff, yeah.
You mentioned your efforts. There are talks going on right now, starting today and this weekend in Miami. What are your expectations from those talks? And the president yesterday made it clear he expects Ukraine to basically step up before Russia walks away. If you wake up in Odessa, if you're Ukrainian this morning seeing Russians are bombing, your city, or if you turn on TV and listen to Putin, what he says, why would the Ukrainians, ignore what the Russians are saying publicly and believe in what they're hearing?
Yeah, look, there's a reason why this war hasn't ended, and that is because there's complex factors at play. I know that sounds like a throwaway line, but it's true. What we have tried to do in this entire process, and let's be clear about this. I mean, the United States is engaged in this. The president says this, and I'll translate what I think he's trying to say to you in all of this, and I think he's been pretty clear about it, is it's not our war. It's a war in another continent. We have equities, we have engagement in this war, but it's not our war per se. But we are been told by everybody, I think everybody would agree, that there's only one nation on earth, there's only one entity on earth that can actually talk to both sides and figure out whether there's a way to end this war peacefully. And that's the United States. And we've invested a lot of time, a lot of energy at the highest levels of our government. I believe, President Trump has had more meetings with foreign leaders and others on the war in Ukraine than on any other subject, including trade. He's invested a lot of time. Steve and Jared have invested time. I've invested time. The vice president, the Secretary of War, others, Secretary of Treasury, and more have invested a tremendous amount of time and energy in this. And what we're trying to figure out here is what can Ukraine live with and what can Russia live with, sort of identify what both sides' positions are and see if we can sort of drive them towards each other to some agreement. Wars end generally in one of two ways: surrender by one side for another, or a negotiated settlement. We don't see surrender anytime in the near future by either side, and so only a negotiated settlement gives us the opportunity to end this war. A negotiated settlement requires two things: both sides to get something out of it, and both sides to give something. And we're trying to figure out what can Russia give and what do they expect to get, what can Ukraine give and what can Ukraine expect to get. In the end, the decision will be up to Ukraine and up to Russia. It will not be up to the United States. So that's the role we are trying to play in this. And that's why you see so many meetings going on. This is not about imposing a deal on anybody. It is about determining what both sides expect and need to have and what both sides are prepared to give in return for it, and figuring out whether we can have those two overlap. And of course, that takes a lot of time and a lot of hard work. It can't generally be done in the media or in press conferences. I think we've made progress, but we have ways to go. And obviously, the hardest issues are always the last issues. Yes. All All right, I'm going to go to the next row, that gentleman right there with the glasses. Well, right behind you, because you're not the next row, that's the next row, right there. Yes,